Nevada officials have cut out of welfare 1,100 families.
Las Vegas then was the Mississippi of the West.
But you know, mothers will do anything for their children. We have to hit the strip.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Indie Lens pop-up series presented by Milwaukee PBS. How cool is this? This is like a book club, but for documentaries, and we have the author and the characters join us each time. It's pretty rad. I'm Milwaukee PBS producer Scotty Lee Myers, and I will be your host tonight. First, I want to tell you a little bit about this pop-up series. So this year, we are presenting some really powerful films. They're all from Independent Lens, and some of these films include Move Me, Love in the Time of Fentanyl, and Free Chol Soo Lee. These films by independent filmmakers from across the country address some of the most important issues of our time and provide a richer understanding of society today. Today's film, though, Storming Caesar's Palace, produced by Hazel Gerland-Pooler, centers around one of the most unpopular and misunderstood groups of women in the United States. We're talking about Black mothers on welfare. Yet the story of this little welfare rights organization that could, fueled by Ruby and her group's determination to provide for their families, is undeniably universal. And this film definitely shifts the narrative. It's also urgent. We are talking about some welfare reform in various states, including in Wisconsin right now. Iowa is having a big debate about SNAP benefits. So this is very timely. Now is a good time to remind everyone to go set your TVs and go tell your friends. This film, Storming Caesar's Palace, premieres on Independent Lens on PBS on Monday, March 20th at 10 p.m. Central Time. That's Monday, March 20th at 10 p.m. Central Time. March 20th, by the way, that's the first day of spring. So there you go. That will be easy to remember. Premiere date, first day of spring. So let us now introduce our first guest on the panel today. She is the director and producer of Storming Caesar's Palace, Hazel Gerland-Pooler. Hazel is a Colombian-born, New York City-based director, producer, and documentary filmmaker. She directed 10 episodes of PBS's Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr., a TV show that I know viewers love. I love it. I saw her Jimmy Kimmel episode recently. And she also co-produced a 6-hour series, The African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross, which won an Emmy, a Peabody, a DuPont Columbia, and an NAACP Image Awards. Storming Caesar's Palace is her first feature-length documentary. She's been working on it for a while, and I think it's pretty safe to say that there will be more awards on her shelf coming. Also with us on Hazel's right, you see her there in the frame with her beautiful smile. This is Sandra Phillips Gilbert. Sandra is a current social services representative at the Department of Human Services and Economic Security Administration in Washington, D.C., and a former elected advisory neighborhood commissioner who represented the Rosedale community in Ward 6 for 10 years. So obviously following a little bit in her mother's footsteps. I gave it away. This is the daughter of Ruby Duncan, the inspiring subject of Storming Caesar's Palace, and she continues the work of fighting for equity and improving life conditions for the entire beloved community, For those of you who are watching live right now, what a great opportunity you have to interact with our guests, to pose questions to them directly. So please do not be shy. If there's something you want to ask, if there's just a comment you want to make, go ahead and we'll make sure to feed that to our guests. So enough of me, let's hear from them themselves. Hazel, Sandra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. This is exciting.
Sandra, I want to start with you, and I got to ask right off the bat, how is your mom, Ruby Duncan, doing?
She's doing great. She's 90 years old, and she's just so excited about the film and the great works that Hazel has done on the film. And so I'm here to represent her as best as I can, and to just to uplift this film in the story of these women, these fearless and courageous women.
Yeah, and there's a really touching scene that we see your family sing Ruby happy birthday. It's really beautiful. You all got some nice pipes on you, by the way. How is she? How old is she now? I'm not sure when this was filmed.
She was 87 years old during that time, and now she's 90.
Okay, and has she seen the film in its entirety? Has she been able to?
Yes.
Wow.
She loves it. You know, she's just so proud, and she's happy that Hazel was able to bring the story of their lives to the screen, to share, you know, what these women experience in their fight and struggle, you know, to help other American families, women and children. So I'm just so proud of her too. I'm proud of all of the women, but just being with my mother and listening to her and learning from her, it's just been amazing experience that has impacted me too.
Hazel, filmmaking is about making an incredible amount of decisions. You got to think about music and editing and who you're going to interview and what the text on the screen is going to look like and the total running time. I mean, it's an incredible amount of decisions that you have to do. The first decision, though, is like, what am I going to do? What's the subject matter? So why pick Ruby's story?
That's a good question. There's sort of many reasons. I first came to this story because I read a book. It's called Storming Caesar's Palace, and it was written by Annalise Orlek. She's a Dartmouth professor, and actually she's re-releasing the book this spring to coincide with the film coming out. So, and you were referring to having a book club, now's your chance. You can watch the film, read the book, and, you know, she updated it to kind of go with the film. But even more so than that, I mean, I knew when I read it, I was like, this should be a film. You know, there's got to be so much archival. I've got to find it. This is going to be great. But from a personal perspective, I'm the daughter. I'm an adoptee. And so I'm the daughter of a 16-year-old Colombian girl, or she was 16 when she had me. And she wasn't able to keep me. So for whatever reason, which I always suspect is probably poverty and many other things connected with that, I've really always wanted to try to tell stories and share the struggles and triumphs of moms who are fighting for their kids. And so this was sort of a natural story that I just instantly was like, I just sort of became obsessed with it. I mean, I've been working on this film for 15 years, got a lot of no's, and I just was totally determined to make this happen. And I think that really had a lot to do with the reason I was so passionate and, determined to make it come to fruition.
I'm curious, when you read that book, Storming Caesar's Palace, was there a particular scene that you were really excited to sort of depict or portray, or immediately your gears were grinding like, that's going to be at the top of the film? Like, was there certain things that stood out as a documentary filmmaker?
I mean, there were definitely moments in the book where I was like, this has got to be in the film for sure. And I think because it's such a historical documentary, a lot ultimately came down to what there was archival material for. So, when you're writing a book, you can write whatever you can find, or, whatever. She did this research and was able to come up with all these things, which is great. But when you're doing an archival film, a lot of it is like, well, this is a great story, but there's no photographs, there's no footage, there's nothing. Like, I can't just have a black screen. So I would say, obviously marching down the strip, I wanted to see what it was like for these women to be doing that, imagining in my mind, I'm imagining, the thousands of women and Jane Fonda and, Ralph Abernathy and all these people marching, and what is, the look on the faces of, the guards or whoever and Caesars and
singing.
Yeah.
We shall overcome.
Yeah.
That was a hit all the time.
Yeah. So it was, just trying to find it. And because it was covered by national news outlets like ABC, NBC, CBS, there was footage that I could come across. So
it occurs for me to ask you, like, when you scanned that footage, that archival footage, did you notice any themes? Like, how was this movement being depicted in popular mass media at the time? How were they portraying this welfare mothers movement?
I mean, it varied. Some reporters were, giving them a little less credibility and a little less support than one would like. But I will say that the footage that I chose anyway, they're giving them a fair shake, and the reporters were asking, real questions, sort of like, when it's a scene, there's a scene in the film where that reporter is saying, did you know that you could have a fair hearing when you were cut off? And the mom is like, nope. They're asking the right questions. And I think that there's, narration in some of the pieces that are kind of making comparisons of, like, in Las Vegas, a family of 4 is getting this amount, but in other states, they're getting a much higher amount. So I think generally people who are reporting on these actual marches were giving them a fair shake. But I think that in the larger context of media, the 50s and 60s was definitely a time when, low-income women were becoming sort of depicted as all these terrible stereotypical things that we think of, really vilified as, being lazy or not, working or taking taxpayer dollars and that sort of thing. But obviously we know that if people were getting paid enough in their jobs, and we had better safety nets, then there wouldn't be people who were needing all of these government programs. So
I want to talk on the myths a little bit, and I think we'll get to that. I'm just such a big believer in giving people their flowers sort of when they're alive and celebrating their lives. You've been able to do that, Hazel. You, on behalf of all of us, you've handed Ruby a bouquet, and I just think, what's sort of the things that come to mind? Like, what should we celebrate most about Ruby Duncan?
Oh, I mean, there's so many things. I mean, I can't even, come up with that's a big question. I mean, I think, so, just so many things, ranging from being able to actually do the things she needed to do for her own family, but then also to be able to mobilize and organize other moms in her community, to be able to feel strong enough to, it's like a David and Goliath kind of situation. And she was able to, she didn't do it alone. Obviously, she was working with all these other moms, but that also took courage and organization and, really just to mobilize folks. So I feel like she was able to use her motto, we can do it and do it better, and really put that into action with Operation Life in particular.
Sandra, is there an aspect, I mean, a documentary is only like 90 minutes long. We just watched sort of an hour version. So like, a filmmaker like Hazel can't put the totality of the woman who is your mom on screen. What other aspects of your mom should we know about that maybe just like we didn't see?
Okay, that's a big question too. But she's humble, just simple and humble, and that is the quality I really admired about her, and just fearless. Yeah, I've never seen my mother afraid, fearless, and humble.
And I feel like also always excited and ready to learn. There was, moments that, we weren't able to include in the film where, and she talked about this a bit, where she didn't really know starting out that the words welfare and rights could be in the same sentence. I mean, coming from being a sharecropper in Tallulah, Louisiana, you didn't have rights essentially, and you couldn't say no or make demands and expect to not be like lynched or something like, so, I think, but then coming into this new situation and kind of realizing, well, if we come together, we actually can have all this collective power. I think was a big learning experience. And in the feature-length version of the film, we see her kind of lobbying for food stamps. So she sort of starts as, a protester in the streets, like using disruptive power to kind of get in there and disrupt business as usual. But then, learning the system also is a big part of it. And I think that's something that we all need to do and get more involved, so that it's not just the protest, but then what's the next step? It's trying to change the rules or the laws. And then how do we do that? And, she was like a co-chair of the Democratic Party, I think, at some point, and she helped get, President Carter elected. And, so there's all these pieces that I would have loved to include. The film would have been a series, 10 hours long.
the trajectory is amazing, as you said, from sort of chopping cotton to, being tapped by, President Carter. I love the scene in the film, she comes into organizing not knowing much. I think there's that quote where she's like, I didn't know how to run a meeting, but you learn along the way. And it's sort of that Margaret Mead quote, about, never doubt the power of a few people to, indeed, it's the only thing that has changed the world. I just butchered that, but I think we all know where we're going there. We're getting questions in from folks who are watching live. I really appreciate that. I see them, I acknowledge them, and just because of what they're asking about, I'm just going to maybe save it for a question or two. So for those of you who have submitted questions, just know I'm going to get to it. These are great questions. Thank you for sending those in. Let's do a little bit of that myth busting about welfare. I mean, your film does such a great job in doing that, but maybe let's just spell it out a little bit more explicitly here. I really like, and correct me on the name of the pronunciation here, but I think it's Pramila Nadesan. She's in the beginning of the film, and she sort of spells out like what welfare actually is and who a welfare recipient is. Can you just kind of maybe touch on that a little bit, just to underscore that point?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, she's sort of saying, and this sort of seems like obvious, that people think of welfare as being a very specific program that is for, families, that is supporting children. But really, welfare can be anything. It's Social Security, it's, farm subsidies, it's corporate welfare, like bailing out the banks and all the wealth, people on Wall Street. I think any time that there is taxpayer dollars being used to do anything for any group in this country, it's a form of welfare. But again, because of the stereotyping that really became entrenched in the 50s and 60s, it became seen as, women of color who were applying for financial support for their families. But again, for me, it's like this is because there was such like systemic problems that folks needed to be able to have a Social Security net. I mean, had there not been redlining, had there not been, people not being able to get jobs and equal wages and equal opportunities and, affirmative action and all these other things, like, if we had a level playing field, it would be a different situation. But I think there's many reasons that we need it. And I think even COVID, sorry if I'm going off, a little bit, but to bring it to today, I think that was something that really pulled back the curtain on inequality, and just all of us, right, realized in like this, we could be all home, we could be all needing help from the government, those stimulus checks. People are still wanting them to continue. We need all of that, and we have every right to it. Where, we pay taxes, we are human beings in the wealthiest country in the world. I mean, it seems like sort of obvious. But that's me. I get on my soapbox.
That's why I love your welcoming message that many of us saw tonight about how we're just a divorce or a medical emergency away. I mean, there was a really popular Atlantic article a couple of years ago that said like more than 50% of Americans are if they were in an emergency, had to pay $400, they couldn't do it.
Right.
Going back to the myths a little bit, that these are broken families, that these are lazy women, that they make poor choices. They don't want to work. This is a Black welfare queen problem. We are somewhat familiar with these myths and how they've been weaponized in sort of political rhetoric. But that's all very abstract for us to understand. Sandra, I wonder if like that weapon, did you feel that weaponization as a child directly? Did your family feel that weapon, those myths personally against your family?
Yes. When I was in the 8th grade, my teacher asked me, does your mother have a Cadillac? And I didn't even know what a Cadillac was. And she said, and I went home and I said, Mom, the teacher asked me if you had a Cadillac. And she said, what? And this was the myth that welfare queens use the money for Cadillacs. And so I was shocked by that. Because I didn't understand why she was asking me that. And the thing about it is my mother was working. She slipped, she fell, she couldn't take care of us. She reached out to the newspaper to get help because she wanted a job. How many people do that? I mean, you're talking about reaching out to millions of folks, and you're asking, how can we get help? She wanted a job. She didn't just want to be what they call the welfare queen. So, that really impacted us because we never seen our mother, lazy or laying around. She was always working, cooking, cleaning, working, meetings, never lazy. So we didn't understand that.
Yeah, and I think we always have to remember that when we're looking at numbers, there's 3/4 of the people who are on welfare are white. They're not people of color or Black women. And it's just like a whole sort of fallacy that has been created. And I think also nowadays, and you know about more of this than I do, but I feel like there's only something like 1 million people who are even receiving TANF, which is, what does it stand for again? A temporary assistance for needy families. So it's just like, it's so difficult to even get on, and it's so measly that you don't even really want it anyway. The idea that you could be buying steaks and lobster and riding around in a Cadillac on welfare money is absurd. I mean, you're actually, in the film, Ruby and them march down the strip and they finally get back on the, get public assistance again, but they're still living below the poverty line. I mean, you don't get any real money on public assistance. So there's so many sort of misconceptions that, are connected with it. That's true. Yeah.
That's a good segue, because another thing I really took away from the film was just how archaic the welfare system was back in the day. It didn't seem to be like a very good wraparound services. There's a moment in the film where Ruby calls and says, hey, I'm trying to get off welfare. I don't want to be on welfare. Can you help me get a job? And it's a dead end, kind of like what you were just referencing, Sandra. So I just wonder, do we know much about the system now? Has it changed? Has it evolved? Is it still archaic? Are there still George Millers in systems across the country?
I would say the policy that we have to use to determine if a person is qualified for benefits, we have to utilize policy that within that policy really limits people. And say you're on TANF and you want a job, you want to work, but if you make a certain amount, then you're not eligible anymore. And the safety net for the stamps and Medicaid, you lose that. So what it does is it pushes someone that is trying to pull themselves up with their bootstraps. It keeps them in a position of, I don't know, I guess I'll stay on welfare because I know I'll have that. But so we need to look at ways of making sure that citizens have a basic income in addition to the safety net of the SNAP program and the Medicaid program, because we deserve that. We're all taxpayers. And but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say some things have changed. It's like in the film, although I think you'd have to watch the feature length version again. There's a
a good plug, March 20th,
yes,
everyone.
watch
Okay.
it on, right, exactly. Because in the film you see there was a rule called the man in the house rule. And so that basically was when caseworkers would come and raid people's houses at midnight in the middle of the night to see if there was a man in the house. And if there was, that was a reason to be able to cut a family off, because the idea was if there's a man there, then they could be taking care of the children financially, even if they're not actually their kids. And if that obviously then means that a woman doesn't have autonomy over the relationship she has. She can't like date somebody because she's on welfare. I mean, that's like absurd. So I think, and so the women, take them to court, and ultimately that was overturned by the Supreme Court, and that is no longer the case. But I think there are things like, if you, and I don't know all of the rules. I mean, Sandra knows because she is actually now on the other side of this, trying to reform things from the inside. But I think some stuff has changed, but I think some of the other things haven't, in really not thinking about recipients and clients, as you call them, as people and families who you actually want to help. I think one of the things that I'm hoping the film will do is really meet, social workers and other people who are in offices who are supposed to be helping their clients, but who instead are just like, oh, they're lazy, I'm going to not give them this bit of money or whatever it is. So hopefully this sort of is a multi-pronged approach, and we can reach all kinds of folks everywhere and try to educate and change things.
Well, that's
change. I'm sorry.
No, you're okay.
No, that's
I'm
okay.
just saying federal policy is the key. It is the federal policy that keeps people in the state that they're in now. And so there needs to be changed in that area.
I mean, I would also, sorry, just to add one more thing, I would say that on the state level, the tricky thing is that there can be federal policy, but as we saw in the film, they'll get like a block grant, or they'll get an amount of money that is awarded to each state, but then certain states can be super stingy. And they'll say like, I was reading the other day, because there's all this crazy stuff going on with Mississippi, how they've got millions and millions of dollars that are just sitting there and they're not giving it out. And I think that happens in many states. So I think it is incumbent upon people who live in each state to demand from their local lawmakers that those funds be released for the programs that they need.
That's correct. I'm looking at it from, because I live and work in Washington, D.C. So we're not a state, but yes,
she doesn't even get
state policies also impact the funding that they get. They have an impact. So that's correct.
You mentioned this multi-prong approach. A pretty good example is the Operation Life. I mean, a medical facility in there, incredible. And this is a good time to incorporate our audience question. So someone has asked, what has become of Operation Life today? So let's start there and maybe sort of talk more about Operation Life. But so what happened to Operation Life? Where is it today?
Unfortunately, it just no longer exists. It made it though for quite a long time. It did survive despite, George Miller's best efforts to charge everybody with fraud. But I think some of the rules started to change. So one of the beautiful things about Operation Life was that it enabled community moms to do work, right? Get paid to actually have social services available to their community. So it kind of dealt with a lot of the like, oh, people aren't working or people aren't having them. Like they were able to do this all themselves, which is incredible. But then there were some laws changed, I think, because they were applying for grants from the federal government as well as from private organizations. But I think the law, at some point, something changed that said that people who are running programs that are getting federal money have to have a college education. And that actually affected a number of community organizations across the country that were doing similar things to Operation Life. So then suddenly all these moms who had set it up, who had organized the whole thing, knew how to get folks into the clinics. Because we hear like Alversa, she talks about how, she would be brushing kids' hair and getting them in the van and bringing them down. That kind of outreach you don't get if it's not community run. I don't see George Miller going and getting anybody, bringing them to anything. So I think that was a real loss and a real change. And I don't know if that was sort of on purpose in a weird way, not to be conspiratorial, but I think that did have a big impact on the community work that folks could do.
I gasped out loud when I was watching the film and saw that George Miller had padlocked Operation Life on Thanksgiving. Just an incredible, I couldn't believe it. But you talked about sort of that law about, requiring college education. We have a good question here. 3 of the co-founders of the NWRO, which is the National Welfare Rights Organization that we heard about so much, they were academic professionals. George Wiley, we heard about him being a professor, Francis Fox Piven and Richard Cloward. But the women, Ruby, Mary, Alversa, the women who led the grassroots movement did not have a college education, maybe didn't have a high school diploma at some, So what does it take to build coalitions between, people from diverse education backgrounds into a grassroots movement? Why is maybe that structure better than sort of a traditional institutionalized higher ed certificate approach?
I mean, for me, just to start, I think, it's the women on the ground or whoever it is on the ground who are the experts, right? They know what they need. We've seen time and time again, politicians that don't know how much milk costs or how much eggs cost or how much diapers cost, right? But women know, moms know that they're paying, way too much for these things. And so I think, balancing the budget, you get a certain amount of money in on this day of the month and you got to pay this thing. Like they're organizing their checkbooks all the time. And I think that having grassroots organizers be the leaders of movements is really important. And they know what they need, I think, far better than, policymakers who haven't had that kind of experience oftentimes. I mean, ideally, this film brings both together. We're going to be screening in Washington, D.C. in the future, and we're going to be screening for different, assembly folks and legislators and stuff in Nevada as well. So really trying to, bring this up to them and have them come and speak to the people and really just have that kind of coalition building, because we can't do it without, again, we got to keep them accountable and have them change the rules and stuff, the laws. But yeah, I think it's terribly important to have folks on the ground who know.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we have about 7 minutes. I want to be respectful to everyone's time, especially Hazel's and Sandra's. They are in South Carolina tomorrow morning. They will be screening this film in front of a live audience. How exciting is that? But I did want to get to at least one more audience question I see here. I'm going to read it here. It says, it seems as though when people in need so clearly demonstrate how significantly our country has left them behind, things get political. Obviously the audit came at Operation Life. Have you, Hazel, experienced this in the making of the film? Have you seen a politicalization of your creation of this?
I don't know. That's sort of a tricky question. I think I have maybe been a little bit more sort of politicized by my education as I've been making this film. I mean, I think I get, worked up when I see all the injustices that's going on. And I didn't know all of this history when I started this project. So I think it's been a learning process for me. Yeah, I mean, I want to sort of change things, and I hope that the film will be able to reach folks so that they can kind of mobilize. I'm not sure if I'm entirely answering your question, but I think it's hard to kind of divorce politics from a lot of these issues, because ultimately, again, it's the politicians who are running our lives. So the more involved we get, doesn't matter if it's Democrat, Republican, Independent, Workers' Party, whoever, you just got to get involved so that, I mean, the last thing I want to do is go to some meeting on a Tuesday night. I've got, my daughter to take care of and all these other things are happening. But the fact is, if I, I then can't really complain that I don't like the way that my neighborhood is run if I didn't show up at the community meeting when I had a chance to say something. So I think, we all just have to get involved. And if there's something that we find unjust, whether it's this kind of an issue or any other issue, just it's time to get, take action, get your own organization. If there isn't one that exists, create one and get out there.
Sandra, in many ways, these are all the same tributaries. These social justice movements are different tributaries going sort of the same river to the same ocean. I wonder what today's movements, maybe the Me Too movement or the Black Lives Matter movement, what can they learn, either the leaders or sort of the organizers themselves, learn from your mom, Ruby Duncan, and the Welfare Mothers movement?
The most important thing anybody can do to make a change is to make sure the people that are going to be impacted have an understanding of what it is that needs to be done. And once you wake them up, that's a powerful group. And so the fear is the politicians get involved because they don't want people to wake up. They don't want people that by keeping us divided, it keeps them in power. But once you get down to what my mother always said, the nitty gritty, the people answering their questions, making sure that they understand what is happening. And that way they can then play a role in helping, not you go out and you do all the work for them. It is the grassroots that is most important, most effective. And when you wake them up, get them involved, like these women, I say they were like the Agoge warriors. If you've seen the movie, The Woman King, these women, when they learned from those attorneys what the policy was, what the mission was, how their rights were being violated, it woke them up and they were dangerous. They were fearless and they were courageous. And that is the most important thing we can do as a society, is everybody play their roles and wake people up. And then all of us come together for a mission and a goal. That's my contribution on that. And I think it can be done. And this movie will show people that it makes no difference if you're educated or not. You have the power to make change. And everybody has a contribution, whether small or large. We can make that change if we pull together everybody. And that's what my mother always told us. We can make that change no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that takes us to the end of today's event. A special thank you to our guests, Hazel Gerland Pooler and Sandra Phillips Gilbert, for being here today. We really appreciate it. We hope that this screening provided a deeper understanding and an opportunity to have a conversation about economic justice, the value of the social safety net in our democracy, and the need for visionary action to help struggling families today. Storming Caesar's Palace premieres on Independent Lens and on PBS, including the video app on PBS, on Monday, March 20th at 10 p.m. Central Time. We're asking those of you who have attended this event if you could please take a few minutes to fill out a survey and share your feedback and your thoughts. This is very helpful for us to understand the impact of this Indie Lens pop-up event. Let's see, what else? Oh, I need to forward promote some things. We hope to see you at our March 29th event. This is for our last Indie Lens pop-up featuring the film Free Shol Su Lee. A special thank you to our national partners, Independent Lens, ITVS, PBS, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and our local partners, MATC. Thank you, Hazel. Thank you, Sandra. Please give our best to Ruby Duncan. We will be thinking about her, and we are inspired by her, and we are glad to be educated about her and her biography. Thank you, everyone. Be well. Have a good night, and take care of one another.
Thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Nevada officials have cut out of welfare more than 1,100 families.
Vegas then was the Mississippi of the West.
Nevada had the second lowest benefits in the country.
They would just find reasons to make it hard. But you know, mothers will do anything for their children. We have to hit the strip. Once you hit them, you got it made.
Storming Caesar's Palace, Monday, March 20th at 10 on Independent Lens.